biggest puzzle of the year 2020 may well be the COVID-19 pandemic. Hopefully, there won't be another. This new strain of the coronavirus has birthed many conspiracy theories on its origin and intention. Today on the program, we'll review these conspiracy theories with a view to accepting them with a pinch or a pack of salt. Welcome to Fireworks. Today, my guest is environmental biologist, Mr. Nwakalor. Of course, you may have guessed from the intro what the subject will be: the coronavirus, COVID-19, the new strain of the disease ravaging the world. The big deal about this edition is that Mr. Nwakalor claims to have decoded the coronavirus, COVID-19, pointing the world in the direction of how the virus can be slowed down. We have a lot to talk about today, by the way. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So our task is cut out for us on the show today. Piece apart all the conspiracy theories, and then you tell us what your proposal is. So, but first of all, let me start by asking this puzzling question from the coronavirus. Where do viruses come from?
So viruses are microscopic organisms that have been around since before the emergence of us as human beings. Viruses are not exactly harmful. They're viruses that are useful to the body. In fact, scientifically, it's argued that we have close to over 300 million viruses in our bodies that are non-harmful. So viruses are as old as the man himself, or older than man or our world. They have been an integral part of world and biological systems for as long as time can recall. Do
viruses exist by themselves, or they must always have a host that they depend on for existence?
So there's been a lot of arguments in science. The arguments have been centered on: is a virus a living thing? Is it an organism? I think this will be an opportunity to just put out what science has to say. So a living organism, according to the scientific perspective or scientific view, will be one that has a cell as its basic unit of life, which means it has membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria, lysosomes, centrioles, and the likes. Unfortunately, a virus doesn't have these things. A virus only has genetic material. It has a nucleocapsid protecting that genetic material, and may or may not have an envelope, depending on if it's an envelope virus or not. So when you look at that comparison between what a cell should have in terms of organelles and what a virus does have in terms of its structure, it means it doesn't have what, according to science, says is the basic unit of life, which is what a single cell would have. So is a virus a living thing? I don't think so. What happens is, because it has certain features like replication, it can store genetic material, which are almost features that living organisms possess. There's been this argument because of those features that is a living thing, but a virus can never be a living thing. It is not a living thing because it is just a chemical compound almost. It's a biomolecule. That's what it is.
Okay, I have a follow-up question to that, but you haven't answered the question that precipitated this answer.
What was the question again?
Can viruses exist on their own, or they must always rely on a host?
Depends on what you mean by existence. If on its own, it's like saying, can a soap exist on its own? Yes, it can. It's just not going to do anything that you would consider activity.
Okay.
But when it starts to become virulent, that's when you say, oh, this is a virus. Otherwise, it's just a solvent. It's not doing anything.
So apart from existing in a human being or being found in an animal, can it exist on its own on surfaces, in the environment?
A virus in itself is not it cannot be said to have a life independent of its host. Once the life is independent of its host, then it is not functioning biologically. It's functioning just as a molecule, like a chemical compound.
But it could either be dead or alive in that circumstance.
It depends on what you call dead and alive. What is life? So from a scientific point of view, life means cell. the basic unit of life is a cell. So when you look for the definition of a cell, you see it's the basic unit of life. So a virus doesn't have what a cell has. So how do you then call a virus a life? The most basic means the smallest unit of life is a cell. A virus is smaller than a cell. So
as a follow-up to your answer to that question that precipitated this, if they do not, if they're not living organisms or they're not living things, how then do they have the capacity to replicate, using your word?
So for replication is part of the life cycle, almost, of the virus. There's
life cycle. The
when
word
you say life cycle, because there's no other way to describe it.
Okay.
Because of those other features I mentioned, it has, such as invading, entry, such as replication. It doesn't breathe, for example. It doesn't digest food. It doesn't excrete. You know, you have characteristics of living things. It doesn't do those things. So except there are double standards for what the characteristics of a living thing should be, you cannot logically say a virus is a living thing. However, your question was, how then does it replicate? I think we first of all need to look at how does it enter, because it needs to enter before it can replicate. So how does it enter? The coronavirus family have 3 members. The first one, which the world came to know about, was the SARS coronavirus, which is the initial one that was found in China in 2003/2004. Then the Middle East respiratory virus in Saudi Arabia, and then now COVID-19. So what we would expect is when you have like a family or a genus or a subgenus of a particular organism, they should have certain traits that are similar. Maybe not all. It's almost like looking at a family, for example, your father and your mother. All the kids might not look exactly like the father or the mother, but there'll be certain behavioral or phenotypical characteristics that they must carry, right? And say, oh, I saw somebody look so much like you, I can bet he's your son. And you hear things like, oh yes, he is my son. So in the same vein, COVID-19 is expected to have certain features that its other members of this corona family have. But we find out that instead of it to have more features like SARS and MERS, which have what we call crossing the species barrier, which means they're now infecting humans, we find out that the similarity from the genomic sequence of COVID-19 that I got from the National Institute of Health, National Library for Medicine. This is a US institute. This is not Nigeria. This is an institute of doctors from all over the world that took the samples from patients in Wuhan and isolated the genome for comparison. There was a program called BLAST that was put together by NIH. It's just connected to the gene bank. So, for example, if you bring out a new virus, you have to register the sequence of that virus in the gene bank so that if something comes up, like a pathogenic disease comes up, you can quickly identify the amino acids or nucleotide sequences from the gene bank, which has identified everything that is a virus that man knows about. So, when that was done, what was discovered was a little strange. It was discovered that the COVID-19 has only 76 to 77% similarity to what is supposed to be its own family member, which is the SARS coronavirus. However, it had an 88% similarity to 2 bad coronaviruses that were discovered in Yushan in China 2 years ago. Now, what became even more interesting, because a lot of the time you need to be able to understand the genome before you can say this is exactly what we did. You know, there's this theory about, oh, you know, it's a synthetic virus, it's a recombination virus, it was done to gain function. Well, if you look very closely...
Can I slow you down?
Yes.
70-something similarity with the coronavirus, the family that it is supposed to belong to, and 80-something similarity with the coronavirus found in bats, right?
Yes.
Are they not the same family? Is it not the same coronavirus huge family?
Yes, it is. But you see, when a coronavirus has already broken the cross-species barrier, like SARS-CoV, it means it's very difficult in biology to find viruses that can break the cross-species barrier.
Okay.
Now you have two viruses in a space of 2004 to 2019 crossing the cross-species barrier.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the second one, what should happen is that you should see a lot of similarity between the first member of the family that crossed the, broke the cross-species barrier and the second one. However, it looks more like a virus that is in the bats that hasn't crossed this barrier. And particularly, when you break the cross-species barrier, it's very rarely in nature or in virology do you see the amino acid sequence being maintained 100% while the virus is in the species, in this case the bats, and then it crosses to a human being, which means if you isolated the coronavirus in the bats and then you isolated this coronavirus, which is claimed to have crossed the species, in the human being, you're not supposed to see 100% similarity in any amino acid sequence. That's breaking the, it's almost like breaking a natural law. But in this case, it was found that there was 100% amino acid similarity between the bat coronavirus, the two bat coronaviruses, by the way, and COVID-19. That can never have happened through nature. That only leaves you with one other option, which is an ortholog, what you call in genetics an ortholog. An ortholog of some other virus was engineered into what we call COVID-19 for gain of function.
Interesting. So by this submission, you are saying that the coronavirus, the COVID-19 strain of the coronavirus, was synthetically engineered, was created by man, in layman's language.
Well, that's what the genome says. It's not I who says it. I saw, for example, you see the SCN5A. The SCN5A comes from the human chromosome 3. It's a gene in the chromosome 3 of human beings. How do you find a gene from a mutated gene from a human being, a disease-causing gene, causing the disease called Brugada syndrome? How do you find the same gene in a virus that came from a bat? Did the human being and the bat evolve together? Very unlikely. So that's what I mean when I say, I'm not talking my feelings. I'm not being emotional. I'm telling you what the science, what these doctors put in the National Institute of Health as the genome of COVID-19, what it says is that there are orthologs from HIV in it, which means the virus is an HIV, COVID-19 is an HIV virus. Is a virus that causes Brugada syndrome also. It's because of the different amino acid residues in the receptor binding motif of the coronavirus, which is also found on the spike protein. So it also causes what we call cardiovascular disease in the lungs. Why? Because the angiotensin function. Angiotensin is the enzyme that is responsible for vasodilating and vasoconstricting. So when you breathe in, the lungs expand. An enzyme is responsible for that. When you breathe out, the lungs contract. The vasodilation is the contraction. Vasodilation is the expansion. Vasoconstriction, rather, is the dilation. An enzyme is responsible for that function. The enzyme pathway is what COVID-19 passes through, so it disrupts that too.
You are aware of the implications of your submission. Your submission lends credence to the theory, which has not been backed by evidence, by the way, that this virus was created. Specifically, that it may have been released from one of the laboratories close to the Wuhan market, where, the virus was initially said to have been released from an animal into a human being. So is that what your position, now your submission, is lending credence to? That theory, that it is a possibility that it may have escaped from?
Well, I try not to get into, what could have happened. I like to keep my position based on what the science says. So it would be difficult except there's another genome for COVID-19, it would be difficult for you to find a situation where anyone would say, for example, there's no chromosome 3 gene there. or no spike protein. So Wuhan Institute of Virology is not too far from the Huanan seafood market, where it was claimed that the patient zero came from, the index case. However, some of the investigative materials, documentaries that I've read, or from sources that I think I can give some credence to, gave me cause to worry, because certain things they pointed out were very disturbing, which made it look like the Chinese government were trying to hide something. I'll mention just a few. For example, you say that the COVID-19 is caused by a bat coronavirus that has crossed the species barrier and is infecting humans. Maybe we bought that the people in Wuhan eat bats, and so they ate, you know, pathogenic or infested bat meat. However, it was discovered that bats are not sold in Huanan seafood market. It's not one of the
wild animals
that are sold. So, if you are blaming a market and an organism within the market that the market clearly doesn't sell, that's number one. Number two, that will make you suspicious is a circular went out in China from the documentary I watched by the Epoch Times of New York. I think a few people who are interested. It was a brilliantly done piece of work by Joshua Phillips. They hurriedly cleaned away the market, like the following day after they declared it as the source of the COVID-19. You don't allow investigators come and take samples. It's like cleaning a crime scene of forensic evidence. Why is it you say this is something that has happened to the world? Professionals will be coming into Wuhan. You say it's that Huanan seafood market, so they should be able to be given access, just like any crime scene you see in the movies. When the forensics come in, you see they're not trying to touch anything. They're with gloves, they're picking samples. Government officials in Wuhan cleaned up the entire market. Issue number two. Issue number three, certain circulars that were sent out saying that they should not share the genome publicly, or they shouldn't share samples, almost like you don't want the narrative that there's a pandemic that has come from China to get out there. Maybe for whatever the repercussions are, I don't know. I'm not a politician. But when you look at some of these kinds of things, you then begin to look a little deeper than the surface. And that's what I did. And I realized then that there's a biosafety lab, P4 lab, which is the highest level of biosafety, where you can actually make biological warfare type things, where you can do synthetic, the types of things that COVID-19 is. Yes, there's that level of laboratory in the Wuhan Institute of Virology called the P4 lab. Now, maybe it leaked from there accidentally. Maybe it was done deliberately. That's above my pay grade, though. But
now, your analysis and your study of events following the outbreak of the virus are adding up fantastically well. If you have all those components, HIV virus, Brugada syndrome, and all of them in that virus, evidently it was created to annihilate.
Absolutely. Whoever created it didn't want to give mankind a chance, because it's like fighting 5 diseases in one disease.
That leads me to the next question, but I'll ask that after the break. You're watching Fireworks. My guest is Tony Nwakalor, environmental biologist who has studied COVID-19, the new strain of the coronavirus, and has strong submissions about its origins and, of course, how to stop the efficacy of the virus in simple terms. There's more after the break. Stay with us. Yes, thank you for staying tuned to Fireworks. If you've been following our conversation from the start, the first half, we've been talking about the origin of the coronavirus, the possibility of synthetic engineering of a virus in relation to COVID-19, and of course, how it can be curbed, or how the damage caused by the virus can be slowed. And my guest today is an environmental biologist who has studied the virus and claims to have that code that can stop the damage caused by COVID-19. Thank you, Tony Nwakalor, for holding on, for your contribution and time on Fireworks. Now, the precursor to the next question was the agreement that if indeed the virus was created, it was created to annihilate. Now, would individuals, whoever they are, create such a virus to reduce, that will be harmful to world population? That's sinister.
There are certain people who are called eugenicists, and this is their only agenda. You can, for the viewers at home, you can Google who eugenicists are. So basically, their
Those
belief
who promote
is
noble birth, the concept of noble birth.
So eugenicists are the brains behind things like Planned Parenthood, contraceptives, and all of those things. They want to control the population. Now, Africa has a population issue. Like, we give birth to more kids averagely than most people. So if there's a problem with overpopulation in the world and it's affecting nature, perhaps the pressure on the nature's resources are too many. One of the places people would want to focus on depopulation would be Africa, don't you think?
You are the one answering the question.
Well,
you are the biologist.
That's my thinking. I don't want to go into things that man is able to conjure in his mind.
If biologists, virologists, scientists the world over have studied the virus and they know what you have found out about the amino acid residue of COVID-19, and they probably have a disposition similar to the fact that, or the proposition now that the virus was created in a process called synthetic engineering, was engineered.
It's called a recombination event. It's genetic recombination.
Genetic recombination.
It's for gain of function.
So why aren't they coming out with this information? I had cause to request that a virologist speak to me on the politics of COVID-19. He shied away. Does it also mean that governments, the world over, the medical teams of governments the world over that are fighting COVID-19 are also complicit?
Well, I mean, the source of the virus is China, isn't it? China is responsible for 17% of the world's GDP, global GDP. China is 17%, one country. So that means they have a lot of money to throw around. And when with money, a lot of money comes a lot of power. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. So my assumption will be one of two things. Either the professionals you mentioned don't really understand the genomic sequence and the amino acid sequence or nucleotide sequence of COVID-19 as put out by the National Institute of Health. That's one possibility. And if that's the situation, then Nigeria is in serious problems. Because if you have virologists that cannot read a genome, then, I don't even know what to say about that. But the second scenario would be you don't want to be ostracized. You want to preserve yourself. If you come out and say anything that is contrary to the global narrative, you'll be treated like an outcast. Now, why would anyone want to risk his professional career over a global problem that is not his personal problem?
Why are you risking yours?
I don't care. For me, I stand for truth all the time. It doesn't matter. You see, you have to get to a point in life where truth is all that matters. Life is not as important as truth.
So what were your findings? Now, let's now come to the big part. What were your findings when you studied the virus, and how can the damaging component be stopped according to your proposal?
So my findings when I studied the virus are these. First of all, the COVID-19 spike protein, which is the S protein, which is the means by which it gains entry into the host cell via the angiotensin converting enzyme receptor. I discovered that this spike protein is the point at which it resembles SARS-CoV. So the ortholog for the spike protein of COVID-19 was from SARS-CoV.